What's the source of anti-Jewish sentiment in the West? Take a look at this clip over here with Melanie Phillips, the British journalist, as she goes through some of the misconceptions and misattributions that are given to the Jewish community throughout the media. So we'll watch this clip together and then talk about it. But first, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
Hello, I'm Melanie Phillips, and this is another Note from the Resistance. Right now, things seem to be spinning dangerously out of control. The tempo and viciousness of the attacks on Israel and the West are now running at fever pitch, especially in Britain. Even some people who previously supported Israel are now falling for at least some of the lies which are bombarding them every single day. Israel's defenders are no longer just getting a hard time in interviews. As Natasha Hausdorff found when she came up against Piers Morgan, they're now getting shouted down altogether and are being deprived of the right to speak at all. An appalling number of people now believe that overwhelming evidence exists that Israel is doing terrible things in Gaza. What's actually overwhelming is the unprecedented and deeply sinister onslaught of lies about this by the media and the world's humanitarian establishment. What people think amounts to overwhelming evidence is in fact the very opposite of the truth. Many find that simply incredible. That's not surprising. It is indeed very hard to believe. How can it be possible, people may well ask, that not just the BBC and Sky and the New York Times and the Financial Times, but also the UN, the international courts, the big NGOs like Amnesty, and British doctors working with the wounded in Gaza's own hospitals are all producing falsehoods? Are Israel's defenders really saying that Israel alone is telling the truth and everyone else is telling lies? Well, it may sound incredible, but that really is what's been happening. Every day, the vast majority of the media and the entire humanitarian establishment are pounding out a narrative about the war in Gaza that channels Hamas propaganda and demonizes Israel. It simply reverses truth and lies. The appalling outcome is that countless people believe Israel really is wantonly killing Gazan civilians, starving Gazan babies, even committing genocide. All these allegations are the very opposite of the truth and defy reason itself. But they're being pumped out in an obsessive manner, day in, day out. No other conflict in the world gets such relentless attention, let alone such a twisted presentation. We've never seen anything like this onslaught before. Its unique double standards, its unique construction entirely from falsehoods, its unique obsessional and unhinged nature tell us that something pathological is going on here. It's a global and verbal pogrom against Israel and the Jewish people. And in America, the outcome is that Jews are getting attacked and murdered. 7 weeks ago, an arsonist tried to burn down the official residence of Pennsylvania's Jewish governor, Josh Shapiro, because he believed Shapiro's support for Israel was causing the deaths of people in Gaza. 2 weeks ago, a young Israeli couple were gunned down and murdered outside a Jewish community event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Last Sunday, in Boulder, Colorado, at least 8 Jews were wounded, 1 critically, when a rally for the release of the Israeli hostages in Gaza was firebombed. The attacker, Mohammed Sabri Soleiman, fired a makeshift flamethrower and threw firebombs while shouting "Free Palestine" and "End Zionists." So, after Israelis were burned alive in the Hamas-led atrocities of October 7, 2023, an attempt was made by a Hamas supporter to burn Jews alive in America. These terrible attacks are the direct outcome of the hysterical demonization of Israel. This week, there have been 3 successive days of claims that the Israel Defense Forces have been massacring Gazans queuing for food from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the new aid distribution center operated by America and backed by Israel. On Sunday, Hamas officials claimed that the IDF had opened fire at this aid center, killing 31 Gazan civilians. A moment's thought would surely have raised an immediate red flag over this claim. Since Israel had been the driving force behind this distribution center to prevent Hamas from continuing to steal aid as it had done throughout the war, why on earth would the Israelis want to shoot those civilians? The aid center emphatically rebutted the Hamas claim, stating that for the whole of that Sunday, aid was handed out safely and without incident, and stating that these claims were false and fabricated and being actively fomented by Hamas. That didn't stop just about every media outlet from uncritically regurgitating these incendiary claims. A similar thing happened on Monday, when Hamas's media office stated that the IDF had killed 3 people and wounded 35 near the aid distribution center. And yesterday, the same thing happened again. The BBC reported, turning deeply questionable claims into a statement of fact, total carnage as 27 reported killed by Israeli fire at Gaza Aid Center. For the 3rd day running, Palestinians have been killed while gathering to collect aid. On Monday, the BBC's Today programme just took the breath away by its unvarnished malevolence. The BBC's international editor Jeremy Bowen, who months ago infamously declared he had no regrets that he'd falsely reported that Israel had bombed Gaza's Al-Ahli hospital, killing numerous patients and staff, whereas it was in fact only the hospital's car park that had been hit by a misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket, informed today's listeners that only the Israelis could have killed so many Gazans on Sunday. Not content with that, he proceeded to pin this wildly unfounded claim on the fact that an Israeli government minister, Bezalel Smotrich, had said that the people of Gaza would have no hope, that they would be totally despairing, and that he wanted them out of Gaza and replaced by Jews. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bowen declared, backed President Trump's plan for Gaza, which, Bowen said, was code for supporting the mass expulsion of Palestinians. Where to start with such a travesty? The Trump plan is not for expulsion, but rather voluntary relocation to other countries, which about half of all Gazans reportedly desperately want to achieve. And just look at how Bowen took Israel's attempt to ensure that never again would it be invaded by genocidal savages, and twisted that into a policy of ethnic cleansing, all while airily making claims about what actually happened in Gaza the previous day, which owed nothing to the facts and everything to his prejudices. In the fog of war, we can't know for sure what did happen, and new evidence may well emerge to shed further light. What actually seems to have been happening, though, is that Hamas, desperate to stop Gazans from obtaining this newly organised food aid, because that has the capacity to destroy its power over the population, has been provoking gun battles with the Israel Defense Forces by firing on both Gazan civilians and Israeli troops, and then blaming these as massacres by Israel on those queuing for food. In yesterday's incident, according to the Israelis, during the movement of the crowd toward the aid distribution site, approximately half a kilometre away, IDF troops identified several suspects who deviated from the designated access route and were moving towards soldiers. The troops fired warning shots, and when the suspects did not retreat, fired additional shots near a few individuals who, according to the Israelis, advanced towards the troops in a way that was construed as a threat. Yet today's media coverage still ran with the Israelis killed 27 at aid point story. This even though the BBC was forced to admit on Monday that it could not confirm what had happened on Sunday because of conflicting reports. Having previously reported that day that Israeli tanks had opened fire on thousands of Palestinians who had gathered near the American aid site, with bodies of the dead and wounded taken away on donkey carts. On Sunday evening, the BBC was forced to debunk an Al Jazeera video it had used in its own reporting of that morning's alleged Israeli atrocity. It reported now that this graphic video, which was said to show the Aid Q massacre and had been viewed no fewer than 134,000 times on one X-post alone, had been filmed about 4.5 kilometers away from the aid distribution center, and in the evening. What gave the Hamas claims particular weight, however, was the testimony of Western doctors in Gaza. Questions now need to be asked about the role of these doctors spreading such lethal disinformation. The medical charity Doctors Without Borders said that on Sunday, patients had told the doctors they were being shot from all sides by drones, helicopters, tanks and Israeli soldiers on the ground. But how did that square with the emphatic statement by the aid centre that food had been handed out all day with absolutely no violence at all, at or near the site? The BBC reported that day that the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza had shared a video of a British surgeon, Victoria Rose, who is in the emergency department at Nasser Hospital, and who described the aftermath of that day's incident. "We've had a shooting at the GHF aid distribution centre near Rafah," she said, adding, "It's absolute carnage here." But how did Dr. Rose know who or what had caused the casualties she was treating? Her statement was put out by the Gazan Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And there's evidence that Hamas gunmen have been killing Gazans queuing for aid. As the Jerusalem Post reported, the Israel Defense Forces released drone footage on Sunday that showed armed and masked individuals in Khan Yunis attacking Gazan civilians attempting to collect aid. According to the IDF, the video captured earlier that day showed men throwing rocks and firing weapons at fellow Palestinians trying to retrieve aid packages. The new aid distribution, which is getting food to Gazan civilians for the first time rather than it being stolen by Hamas, is the gravest threat possible to Hamas. None of this, of course, has been reported in the mainstream media. Instead, others with a deep interest in Israel losing this war have been piling in to help Hamas prevent Israel from winning it. Meanwhile, Hamas announced yesterday that it had executed a number of Gazans for unknown crimes, almost certainly for speaking out against Hamas, or allegedly collaborating with the Israelis, or taking food aid being offered to them. Of course, no mainstream media have reported those executions. That's because they don't actually care about the fate of the people of Gaza. What drives them instead is their intense and unhinged desire to bring Israel down. The reason these falsehoods have gained such traction is because there's now a global echo chamber in which the lies people are hearing are bouncing off them towards others who are then echoing them back, reinforcing the impression that they are the unchallengeable truth. The humanitarian and human rights establishment constitutes one such feedback loop. The mainstream media constitutes another, and both feedback loops are feeding into each other. The outcome is an alliance between the media and human rights bodies that's libeling Israel and the Jewish people on an unprecedented global scale, under the guise of sounding the alert about Israel's war. And that's because no other conflict in the world features a propaganda apparatus as extensive and as wicked as the Islamists' use of the Palestinian cause as a weapon of extermination and holy war against Israel, the Jewish people, and the West. War is always hideous, even in the most just of wars, as Israel's is. There are always innocents, including children, who are tragically killed. That's no less true in Gaza, even though the Israelis are going to far greater lengths to try to avoid civilian casualties than any other military on earth. But if you are someone who's not convinced by any of this, or if you're someone who's always believed that Israel commits war crimes, or if you're someone who has been sympathetic to Israel but now thinks there's just too much evidence that it's doing terrible things, please stop and think for a moment. Does it occur to you to wonder why you're being bombarded with images of suffering in Gaza every single day, while being told next to nothing about the children dying of starvation in Sudan or the atrocities against Christians in Africa? Does it occur to you to wonder why, if there is starvation in Gaza, so many Gazans are conspicuously well fed? Or why not one single example has been produced of a person or child who's actually died of starvation there? Does it occur to you to wonder, if the Israelis are wantonly killing huge numbers of civilians, why they've been constantly moving Gazan civilians from place to place to find relative safety outside the active war zones? Does it occur to you to wonder, after Hamas has rejected yet another ceasefire deal this week, how it can be that people allegedly suffering from starvation, from war crimes, from genocide, turn down a proposal for their suffering to be brought to an end? No? You don't find cause to wonder about any of this? You think the answer to all these questions is Israel is guilty? In that case, you inhabit a different universe altogether, a lost world of captured minds. Decent, rational people everywhere will realize by contrast that the West is now in grave danger of toppling into a very dark place indeed.
What do you think about that? The very ideologies that we combated in the West, the Hitler and the Stalin ideologies, have infiltrated mainstream thought in the West, whether it's in the academics, whether it's in the media, and across the board. This is something that has unfortunately become more and more mainstream nowadays. However, we as individuals all have the ability to push past it and get through it. If you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.